started a new job. Oh. A good friend of mine. Said to the other day,
then the second dog went
looking for somebody kind of be my
So
assistant.
they handed him off to law enforcement. Okay.
Then the third dog,
Run out and get the essay.
and the third dog advanced into seeing track. And the one we have now, they're not sure where she's going to go.
He is one of the biggest,
But it goes through testing, and then they decide.
still the, at least, one of the biggest
In what organization,
diamond brokers between.
even though they might not be seen, they might go to something else.
He travels quite a bit, not as much as he used to. So I said,
Rich never did.
hire him.
No, they had dogs, but
Yeah, but Rich was a little busy and on the road a lot. He was
I
diplomatic.
don't care. It's
And just a little bit. And literally got to see a whole lot of the world.
but this is, I think it's Brianna said she's going
learning
to
a new
she's
industry.
going into procedure.
Please,
Not taking all the
something. Life.
She said, I need to have 1 year of college experience.
Fair enough.
I never knew buying a diamond was something other than calling it wine and saying,
Well, yeah. See,
From another sister-in-law and my ex-nephew arrived yesterday for a visit to Indiana. And I asked when they may come in. Either Saturday night, either Friday night or Sunday morning, Saturday morning. So they arrived yesterday at 8:30 p.m. I said, so Saturday was there. No, they want to come to us. So I started, tell me we are coming and we want to her. But at 8:30. No, I mean, they are saying that they are arriving at 8:30. I figure they're driving by car, they will stop somewhere and eat. I mean,
I didn't know.
so it started. So today I told them I'm going to Torah Study. I will back at 11.
Quiet about it.
The cleaning lady, my cleaning lady is in San Diego. So the substitute is coming at 12 o'clock. So I'm not available.
Right. And that's how.
No, it's
Don't go now.
just for the doctor. So I'm making dinner. And I told I will stay there for the lunch.
Oh, no. Jimmy, everything. That's right. Cancel plans. That's good. It's not likely. It's time, but nobody expects it.
Letting go. I sent over my sister-in-law. I'm doing something.
I found out that on Saturday, I come back and say,
Or whatever, the main thing is you got out.
I
I really should take a course because my kids said, just take a course. I don't want to sit down and
I did not know that. Slash white too. I did not know that.
The way I met them,
did you bring those? I mean, going there, I wanted to.
I was scared.
You are more technological minded, but you're interested. I was kicking and screaming. I didn't want to do the shopping.
somebody for about 3 years.
Yes, I just, I'm just glad that she
Construction project.
So they both,
I mean, Alec wanted from the get-go. He, despite of his limitations, wants the latest sketches. And I said, forget about it. You don't even know how to tackle what we want. I said, Abacus is the one for us.
But what's happened now is it's been, let's say, 20 years. It's circled back around to discovery. I mean, it has some good concept. It's
Yes.
no, I mean, I think it's hard to
So you have to kind of live with them.
So, and they don't leave a she's not a doctor, but she knows enough. Oh, she acts. She knows it from her mother, she knows it because her husband, and she is watching this.
and I think it was
And I don't even know.
so I pulled up.
Not only me.
And you know, you can change.
Well, now I go, you wear one.
On the phone, you can change it, then you gotta do all this.
I know.
But on the iPhone, it just.
No, I'm happy with my iPad. It serves me well, but I limit myself because I'm interested in just like you said.
3 days after. There's enough dust here. And it's because the ducts are dirty.
Part of the choice.
Just the filter. The air conditioning.
Because I think there's hard. We always
well, Tuesday morning, Tuesday morning,
I'd rather not. I think we're all fearful of that.
well, she said no. As long as we're married yesterday. He said, you gotta go get his, shot
Okay.
So, he said,
Well, anyway, so.
I always say what I need is that I'm ready and I don't, but I know that there are building books that I want to get and if it's a reference book and it's I'm sure it's a crazy, you see why
Or he just says, I'm the summer, and it's not. And that may be what they I don't know.
I know. I never the weather, the temperature.
I was doing it for my publishers because I told you I made an edit, black and white, and purple, those
All my list of people which are small.
They call whatever the hell.
Well, that's what I always say.
I think I wrote this one on lunch. That's the way it is. By the way we saw those. It's got
It's true.
It's got glorious music. And you? Well, by a hair. Thank you so much.
Okay, enjoy.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Shabbat Shalom. And welcome to those who are live streaming. Always great to have you with us.
We have some Shabbat things going on out in the hallway, so that, yeah. Why don't we keep, for a little bit, keep one door open, just so people who might be coming late don't feel as if they shouldn't come in. If it gets too noisy, we'll close it. Yeah, good. We can handle the noise. I just don't want latecomers to feel that maybe we don't want them. Okay, so, okay. All right. Some thank yous for the bagels. Michael Rezes, he's not here yet. Sponsor the bagels in honor of the birthdays of family members. I'll try to remember when he comes, if he does, to say it again. Eric Shaw, live streaming. Thank you so much, Eric. And pick up, Eddie Levine. Is somebody in here pick up this morning?
He came and left.
He came and left.
Yeah, he didn't know what to do with them. He
Great.
Said, I have bagels, what do I do with them? I said,
I'm a little surprised. Eddie, if you're watching, thank you so much. Okay, very good.
When I called him, he had signed up for it, and he started talking about when do I pay for them, so I said, no, you don't pay for them, you just pick them up. And then I realized this morning, he probably had signed up just to pay for them.
Okay. Oh, boy. Well, we'll see, we'll see. All right, very good. Seems to be working, which is the main thing. Okay, so let's continue with our blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kitshana b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu la'asok b'divrei Torah. We praise you, Lord our God, sovereign of the universe, who sanctifies us with God's commandments, enjoining upon us the obligation to immerse ourselves in words of Torah. Amen. Okay, so I want to look at Leviticus chapter 16 this morning, which is the scapegoat chapter, which is fascinating in its own right, but is an example, as I'll try to point out through some of the things that I brought, secondary sources, is a common kind of theme in the history of religions, ancient religions for sure. The idea of riddance, getting rid of, and the scapegoat has the function of getting rid of the sins or the impurities of the community. So we want to take a look at that and see how it works. An important question for us, which I hope will loom over our discussion, is the ways in which this entirely archaic ritual, temple and blood and scapegoats and sending them out into the wilderness, which has nothing to do with how we do ritual. Whether or not, if we can get beyond the particulars, we would see something of the universal structure of worrying about, in one way or another, the impurities that befall a community and an individual. And the impurities are contagious in this particular design. And if we think about it, just, I don't want to discuss it at this moment, but if we just keep in mind, think about the issue of how loose talk, lies, crimes can contaminate a community and not just an individual. It's not for nothing that we incarcerate criminals, irrespective of the issue of do we do it humanely, should there be judicial reform, and so on and so on. Why do we do that? Because in some ways not only to punish them, but to keep them out of the community, because their proclivities or actions are likely to contaminate a community. So I think it's worth thinking about getting beyond the ancient particulars to the structures and the issues that they give rise to, and wonder whether or not the same thing pervades all communities down through history who try in various ways. How about burning of witches? I mean, nobody condones that, but that was an attempt to rid the community of alleged impurities. So, once again, we're confronted with an ancient, apparently irrelevant text, but may have resonances down to our own day. So let's look at chapter 16, begin to read some of it and see what we can make of it. So the Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron. By the way, after the death gives the name of this Torah portion, Acharei Mot, after the death. After the, you see how we name Torah portions. Not after, well, let me start that again. We name Torah portions for the first word or the first non-repetitive word. So in Hebrew, Vayadaber, which means and he spoke, and that occurs millions of times in the Torah. So we couldn't name a portion Vayadaber. Vayadaber Adonai. That too happens over and over again. El Moshe. That too happens over and over again. So the first four words, which prima facie, so to speak, would qualify as the name of the portion, happen so often as not to give that, if we were to use those words, it wouldn't give any distinctiveness, uniqueness through the name to the Torah portion. What are we reading this morning? Vaydaber Adonai. Really? I mean, that happens over and over again. Tell me more. Acharei Mot. That happens only once after the death. So the name of the portion comes only with the fifth and the sixth words. The Lord spoke to Moses after the death of the two sons of Aaron, who died when they drew too close to the presence of the Lord. Interesting in itself. In chapter 10, where the episode first comes up, they are criticized for bringing a strange fire before the Lord, an Eish Zarah. Here, it's because they came too close. So as I think I said last week, there may be two different traditions about the origin of this kind of episode, each of which, but whatever the origin or the issue of conflict, it points to something very, very important. And that is, if we're dealing with impurity, the first impurity to be dealt with, or the most important impurity, is the impurity of the priest himself after the sons of Aaron did something wrong. So in a way that may seem paradoxical, it's precisely the agent of purifying the sanctuary and the people, who himself is the most subject to impurity. It's the priests that violated the norms of the sanctuary. Beware, priests, because not only, or maybe only, in your hands is the possibility of the purification of the community and taking something that is radically off-center and right it again. You're the ones. So your purification, your purity, you're doing it in the right way. There's something very much at stake there, not only for the priest, but for the community. So I think what we have here at the beginning, aside from just being a kind of note about how this thing gets started, points out the centrality of the purification, the purity and impurity of the priest. The Lord, verse 2, said to Moses, "Tell your brother Aaron that he is not to come." That clinches it, doesn't it? It deals first and foremost with Aaron, the high priest. He is not to come at will, the Hebrew is b'chol 8, at any time. Of course, the whole chapter is about the way in which the priest does come into the Holy of Holies. So the translation, the wooden translation, I might say, at any time, would conflict with what actually happens. So one could translate at any time as at any old time. Anytime you want. No, you can't do that. You can only come at an appointed time. I don't know if I like at will, but if it connotes particular times, okay. Tell your brother Aaron that he's not to come at any old time, I'll say. By the way, I'm spelling old, O-L apostrophe, at any old time. It's a little biblical humor. I'm trying to see if that resonates. A little bit. Okay. It's hard to get biblical humor. It's hard to find. Tell your brother Aaron that he's not to come at any old time into the shrine behind the curtain. The shrine here, HaKodesh, is the Holy of Holies. And remember, there are 3 zones in the Mishkan, the tabernacle, or in priestly documents, mostly the Ohel Moed, the tent of meeting. There's the outer court where the people can come. That's the right-hand square of this triangle. Remember how we did that? And then the left-hand square has 2 zones. The holy place, which is everything except the Holy of Holies, which is right in the center. The outer court, the holy place, and the Holy of Holies. The shrine here means the Holy of Holies. Behind the curtain, that gives it away, right? Tell your brother Aaron that he's not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain, in front of the cover, the kaporet, that is upon the ark. So the kaporet is the lid of the ark. Kaporet has kaper in it to cleanse, to purify, so that the kaporet has 2 functions. It is a cover, and therefore the throne stool of God, but it also is, and it's translated, I think Luther translates it, mercy seat, which is not bad. It's a place where something cleansing can happen, like Yom Kippur. It serves as a throne stool because, as you remember, that kaporet has attached to it, so that it makes one piece, the 2 keruvim, the 2 cherubs, which are hybrid figures with wings, and their wings, I'm one of the cherubs, there's another one here, goes over to one, so creates a kind of enclosed space with the kaporet as the lid, where God comes and dwells and speaks to Moses. Okay? So that's what is happening here in the Holy of Holies. And in the ark itself is the Ark of the Covenant, is the covenant, maybe the 10 Commandments. That's what it says in Samuel, 1 Samuel, that the only thing in the ark are the 10 Commandments. Tell your brother Aaron, I'm back at the middle of 2, that he is not to come at will into the shrine behind the curtain in front of the cover that is upon the ark, lest he die. Okay? You do it wrong, you're dead. That's what's at stake here. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. And this idea of a cloud, which may have a kind of burning fire within it, represents the presence of God. Lest he die. For I appear in the cloud over the cover. Thus only shall Aaron enter the shrine with a bull of the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. And you can see that these two offerings utilize the map of offerings in the first 5 chapters of Leviticus, the 5 different kinds of offerings, which are laid out there and then utilized in different ways. Thus only, verse 3 again, shall enter the shrine with a bull of the herd for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. He shall be dressed in a sacral linen tunic with linen breeches next to his flesh, and be girt with a linen sash, and he shall wear a linen turban. The uniform. The uniform, I'm going to overstate it, obscures the identity of the individual. The individual ceases at this point to be an individual and becomes a role, playing a role. Okay? Think of Isaac in the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. Isaac is playing a role there as the offering that God wanted Abraham to sacrifice. Of course, he asks questions and he begins to wonder what's happening, and there the individuality of Isaac emerges, but as a sacrificial offering to be, he's playing a role, which obscures his identity. The point of a uniform is the particularity of the individual is obscured. Okay. They are sacral vestments. In the middle of verse 4. He shall bathe his body in water and then put them on. And from the Israelite community, he shall take 2 he-goats for a sin offering and a ram for a burnt offering. So notice, 2 entities bring sin offerings and burnt offerings. The priest, entity number 1, and the people, entity number 2. Entity number 1 is one and only one person who has to offer a sin offering, right? So there's no pretense here that the priest is sinless. The priest has some expiation to do. Otherwise, he wouldn't need to bring a sin offering. Aaron, verse 6, is to offer his own bull of sin offering to make expiation for himself and for his household. I love this idea, don't you? That leaders can be idealized. There can be unrealistic expectations. Let's recognize that even the leaders, now the rabbi is not on the par with the priest. The rabbis couldn't get into the Holy of Holies if it existed. So the priest is at the very top of the ladder of being. But still, the priest's sinfulness, or having committed a sin, is acknowledged. Aaron shall take the 2 he-goats and let them stand before the Lord at the entrance of the tent of meeting. And he shall place lots upon the 2 goats, one marked for the Lord and the other for Azazel. So it looks like each goat has a kind of a sticky with Le Adonai, for God, and Le Azazel, for Azazel. Okay? So that these goats each have a function now. We'll look at that in a minute once we get a little more text. Aaron shall bring forward the goat designated by lot for the Lord, which is to offer as a sin offering, while the goat designed by lot for Azazel shall be left standing alive before the Lord to make expiation with it and to send it off to the wilderness for Azazel. Okay? So, what is and who is, what or who is Azazel? And I want to look at that in a minute. Aaron shall then offer his bull of sin offering to make expiation for himself and his household. He shall slaughter his bull of sin offering. He shall take a panful of glowing coals, scooped from the altar before the Lord. This is in the open court, the right-hand square of the tent of meeting. So from the sacrifices that have been made daily, take some coals, take some embers, panful of glowing coals, scooped from the altar before the Lord, 2 handfuls of finely ground aromatic incense, and bring this behind the curtain. Just a little bit of an aside here. I think I've mentioned this before. So Maimonides, in the Guide for the Perplexed, when he talks about the meaning of the mitzvot, the ta'ameh ha-mitzvot, and as a rationalist, Maimonides feels compelled to make meaning out of these apparently arbitrary actions. Okay? Why incest? Why incense? Why a burnt offering rather than another offering? Maimonides makes the interesting point that we can make a rhyme or reason out of these elements in general. But to the question, why 2 handfuls in verse 12 and not 1 or 3, we cannot bring under the category of reason. That's Maimonides' view. Reason can take us only too far, and some of it seems arbitrary. That's kind of nice, actually, because Maimonides wants to work hard to show us that the Torah makes sense. It's not merely a function of emotion or irrationality. But after all, how far can you take the rationalizing of these details? So Maimonides also recognizes that though he feels compelled to get these things under the category of reason, if he tried to tell you why 2 handfuls and not 1, he would, I think himself feels, that would be merely arbitrary and forcing the matter. Okay. So let's go back to 12. And he shall take a panful of glowing coals scooped from the altar before the Lord, and 2 handfuls of finely ground aromatic incense, and bring this behind the curtain. He shall also put the incense on the fire before the Lord, so that the cloud from the incense screens the cover that is over the ark of the pact, lest he die. I suppose the lest he die means if you say to yourself, I'm not sure I want to do every detail that the Torah, I want to leave one out, or I want to do it a little differently. Lest you die. So it's a matter of doing it according to plan. You remember in Exodus 25 that God showed Moses the blueprint of the tabernacle. And that is the way in which we can tell the difference between valid and invalid sanctuary building. Valid means you got it from the authority. Invalid is you did it according to your own needs. So there's concern here to get it right on the assumption that there is a standard and here it is. I mean, would it bother us if we decided, we're going to start the Friday night service at 6:15? We get a lot of people who, I'm just talking out loud here, who can't make it to 6 o'clock. So we say to ourselves, why are we so rigid about 6 o'clock? Let's start at 6:15. Whose idea is that? From below, from us. I mean, obviously, I'm imposing a kind of rubric here that doesn't apply to us. Nobody would mind if we went to 6:15. But there's the idea here that there is a right way to do it and a wrong way, which in a sense we have let go of to some degree. Verse 14. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and sprinkle it with his finger over the cover on the east side. And in front of the cover he shall sprinkle some of the blood with his finger 7 times. Blood is a kind of detergent here. It helps the process of purification. He shall then slaughter the people's goat of sin offering, bring its blood behind the curtain, and do with its blood as he had done with the blood of the bull. He shall sprinkle it over the cover in front of the cover. Thus he shall purge the shrine of uncleanness and transgression of the Israelites. Here, the impurities of the action of the people makes the altar impure. And God cannot tolerate God's presence at an impure altar. So impurity not only contaminates the community, but it alienates God from the community. And if you want God near, and who doesn't? I mean, when we offer our prayers during silent prayer, for example, and we say to God, please, something or another, unless we take it metaphorically, and if you believe in a personal God and a God who listens and hears, then you would like God to be in the vicinity, near, to be able to hear. Otherwise, that non-metaphorical understanding wouldn't work. In a way, you're offering your petitions in a vacuum. So there is something about the nearness of God which can happen in two ways, I take it. One, God's will, but the other, the activities of the people. We have the capacity through creating some purity of bringing God near to us. Similar to the Deuteronomic notion applied to mitzvot. If you follow the mitzvot, you'll get the rain in its season. If you don't, you won't. Who is the independent variable in the Deuteronomic logic? Human beings. God will respond to our actions. That is similar structurally to the point we're just making here. Now, not ethically, but ritually. That the issue of purity and creating it will bring God near. God will respond to it. We become the independent variable, God the dependent variable. Okay, 16 again. Thus he shall purge the shrine of the uncleanness and transgression of the Israelites, whatever their sins. And he shall do the same for the tent of meeting, which abides with them in the midst of their uncleanness. Notice, by the way, that there's a presupposition that contamination, sinfulness of one kind or another, happens. It's part of the human condition. Impurity is part of the human condition. The question is, can we rectify the situation or not? Or to put it differently, can we rectify the situation, or do we need some other agent to do it for us? And the logic here is there is a way back. Being impure, being out of sorts, having a community that is imperiled by impurity is something that we can take charge of and bring back to its initial purity. So, once again, agency of human beings in a theistic universe, in a universe that God created and manages, still there is powerful room for human beings to make or break their society. And we're not consigned to this sinfulness and impurity forever. Not only is there a way back, we are given the blueprint for the way back. So it's not that God says to us, so to speak, it's up to you, and we say, well, how do we do it? I'm not telling you. Here is the blueprint for getting back in ritual terms. But the ideas behind this, I think, are perennial. Is there a way back or not? Yes. Do we know the way? Yes. So that we can return the community to its pure state, knowing that we're going to act in such a way as to create impurity again. And therefore the ritual will have to be done all over again. But it's there. So I find that powerful. And unless you kind of lift those assumptions out of the text, it looks like a bewildering array of archaic activities. Okay, so, verse 17. When he goes in to make expiation in the shrine, nobody else shall be in the tent of meeting until he comes out, preeminent over everybody. When he has made expiation for himself and his household and for the whole congregation of Israel, he shall go out to the altar that is before the Lord and purge it. He shall take some of the blood of the bull and of the goat and apply it to each of the horns on the altar. Now he's into the open space, the first part of the tabernacle, where the altar is, where the people can come in and offer their offerings. Well, through the priest, of course. And the rest of the blood he shall sprinkle on it with his fingers 7 times. Thus he shall cleanse it of the uncleanliness of the Israelites and consecrate it. That's the climactic verse, isn't it? Thus, what is needed for the well-being of the community can be effected. Thus he shall cleanse it of the uncleanness of the Israelites and consecrate it. When he has finished purging the shrine, the tent of meeting, and the altar, the live goat. So we've prepared the goats. We've sacrificed the first one to God. We put the goat for Azazel aside for a moment while he did all these other things. Now we're returning to implement what we have prepared for. When he has finished purging the shrine, the tent of meeting, and the altar, the live goat shall be brought forward. Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and transgressions of the Israelites, whatever their sins, putting them on the head of the goat. And it shall be sent off to the wilderness through a designated man, biad ish iti, which really means a man for the time, a timely man. But what the heck could that mean? Designated makes some sense here as a translation. Thus the goat shall carry on it all their iniquities to an inaccessible region, and the goat shall be set free in the wilderness. Okay, so there are 2 regions. There's the region of, let's call it civilization. And let's define civilization as a place where life makes sense. There are ideas, there are values, there are goals, there are methods. We know what they are. And by doing them, we live a civilized life. Then there's the other region, which is its opposite. It's a wilderness. It's inaccessible. It's chaos. It's tohu vavohu. In the beginning, God created everything. The earth was unformed and void, and darkness hovered over the face of the deep. The initial conditions of creation, according to the Torah, are there is something, but it's chaotic. It's formless and void. And what civilization does is give form to the elements of the lived life. What Leviticus is suggesting here is that chaos, that wilderness, still exists. It's part of the nature of things. It hasn't been put aside. You remember what happens in the Noah story. The waters of the creation were set aside, not destroyed. Because what happens in the Noah story is the initial conditions of chaos break out again. So the Noah story presumes that though God created an orderly world in chapter 1, It's not as if God destroyed chaos and now there's only order. Chaos looms. It looms ontologically. It's not just a state of mind, it exists. And it threatens because it's the opposite of civilization. So the realism of this episode, I think, is also quite stunning, and we'll read a little bit more about it. Patty, you have a comment, question?
Yeah, where's the incentive for the congregation to behave itself if there's this expiation process that is set out?
Right. Basically, it doesn't exist. This is a hierarchical societal structure, and the people can bring their offerings, but they can't affect the ritual which is efficacious. This is done by a priest. So this is not an egalitarian democratic society. Fortunately for us, if I can put a good spin on it, the way out for us exists, but it has to be implemented by a designated person. Okay? So, you know, it may be similar to the idea of sacraments in Christianity, which can only be implemented by an ordained individual. Not anybody can come up and change the bread and wine into the blood and body of Christ. Only the sanctified priest. So it's let me put it this way. It's a form of religion which is hierarchical, but that doesn't mean everything is. So I think that's the answer to your question.
Even if there's no way to participate in the ritual, there doesn't seem to be any pressure on the people not to sin or become impure, because it can all be ritually abolished.
You can wipe it away just by bringing an animal. Yeah. It's a good point. I don't know if that's true. I mean, you know, this passage doesn't contend with the issue of motivation. It's only interested in the action. And of course, the action can be done perfunctorily. That's your point, isn't it?
I'm just concerned that this doesn't encourage a society that behaves itself. You know, we have all these rules and social contracts now, but I don't think that Leviticus encourages that development.
You know, I think you're making a powerful point. And my response is, I mean, if I were sitting where you're sitting, I might not accept just what I'm about to say. But I think it's worth putting out there, and that is there are modes of social organization. This is one of them, which has its power, but also its limitations if you are interested in individuals being able to do something authentically and efficacious for themselves, or participate in that ritual in an efficacious way. And that is not this social organization. The advantage of it, I think, is that we may not feel up to the task of atonement for ourselves. I'm going to carry a lot of guilt, and I'm going to try to do something about it, but I'm still feeling guilty. Wouldn't it be great if there were an algorithm, a decision procedure through which I can get atonement? Yes. Bring 2 bulls to the altar, give it over to the priest, and have him go through the various ritual, and it will happen. The cleansing, which psychologically may seem impossible to us, is done in a full and complete way for us, because I don't know if the following is part of it. We can't do it for ourselves. Now, by the way, when you turn to chapter 17, let's just look at 17 for a minute. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelite people and say to them," stop here. Looks like a continuation of what we've just done. Speak to Aaron and so on. This is what the Lord has commanded. If anyone in the house of Israel, or back to verse 2, speak to Aaron and his sons and to all the Israelite people. So this chapter seems to introduce a pan-Israel orientation, as opposed to what has happened up to 16, which is very priestly oriented. If you look at 19, chapter 19, that just says it in dramatic ways. The Lord spoke to Moses, saying, "Speak to the whole Israelite community and say to them, 'You shall be holy.'" Now it's not just the priests who are subject to imperatives. Everybody becomes responsible. And this turn from one person at the top doing it for us to everybody having the obligation to do something, which the turn happens in chapter 17, has led scholars to believe that chapters 17 to 26 is a separate unit which came into Leviticus late. And that is what they call the Holiness Code. Okay? So not only, see, Leviticus is now, just in terms of the documentary hypothesis, right? What documents finally converged on this text? We might think that what Leviticus is P. It's a priestly document written by priestly interests. That's true. But there is a subset under P, which is pan-Israel, and not merely hierarchical with one individual at the top. Why don't we call it H? So 17 to 26 is P, and in parentheses, H. P with H as a subset, because it's still priestly, you see? So I imagine, Patty, you now are among those people who is putting the Torah together. And you're sitting around a table, and you've got a bunch of stuff on the table. This, and you've got something from somewhere else. And you're having the question, what should Leviticus look like? And the consensus is chapters 1 through 16. And you say, wait a minute now, what about individual responsibility? What about the individual having some power in his or her own regeneration? And everybody else around the table says, no, we're not going to do it. But you insist that they come back the next day, and you mount an argument for individuality. And finally, they relent, and they add 17 to 26. Which does get to your question, doesn't it?
It does.
Yeah. How adequately, I guess, we'll be looking at. But still, I think it does. So I've never thought of this before until you said this. It may be that H has entered at some point because, or for one of the reasons that you point out. What about the empowerment of individuals, which is so prominent a part of biblical literature, which is replete with narrative. And narrative has real live individuals who are faced with choices and dilemmas and have to act. I mean, once you build your Bible out of narrative, you're committed in a way to human initiative and free will. And it seems absent here. Jim.
To Patty's point regarding motivation,
Yeah.
it could be that the population or whatever, they weren't aware they were doing anything wrong. It might be an educational exercise.
In what sense?
All this purification might dawn on them, gee, we have to do this, we must have done something wrong. They might not even have been, the population may not be even aware of these rules, or that they broke them, or that they did anything wrong. I mean, some of the rules, you know, it's implicit that people did something wrong, otherwise you wouldn't have to do all this. But they may not be aware of exactly what it is they did wrong, to the point of ending the chaos.
It's an interesting point. So the doing may create some internalization of why we might be doing this.
Well, I'm thinking of it's an educational exercise.
Pedagogical, yeah.
And we're assuming that the general population is looking up to these priests, to the priest. We have to assume that he has some authority.
Oh, sure.
Otherwise, none of this, I think, would work.
Oh, absolutely. Oh, I think that,
So he's educating them, whether they know it or not, that, you know,
right.
you did all these things wrong.
Yeah. So it's interesting. I mean, Patty introduces a kind of egalitarian issue, and you're introducing a psychological component, which I think, I don't know if I'm right about this text is not interested in. But you're suggesting that there is also pedagogical an impulse here, not only to do the ritual in a certain way, but to take it to heart, to ask yourselves, what does this mean about me? By the way, those of you who are in poetry, Thursday afternoon poetry, we read a poem on Thursday with exactly the same structure. The Rilke poem, the bust of Apollo, I'm sorry? Apollo, yeah, where the poet is observing the bust and recognizing the potencies there and the power. And the last line is, you must change your life. His point is that taking seriously an aesthetic object can eventuate in something beyond aesthetics and have an ethical implication. Here, I think Jim is raising the point here of a ritual activity also having a potential. It's for real, it's seeing and examining and feeling the bust, which then leads abruptly at the end to an imperative. You're suggesting something similar. Doing the ritual might get us to entertain a different perspective here, that maybe I did something wrong. I like that. The pedagogical implications of ritual, well, it's everywhere present in our ritual. Let's go on a little bit. Where are we? So, where?
19. You told us.
Okay, good. Let's go back to 19. I think we're at 20. We may have done some at 20. When he has finished purging the shrine, the tent of meeting, and the altar, the live goat shall be brought forward. Aaron shall lay both his hands upon the head of the live goat and confess over it all the iniquities and transgressions of the Israelites, whatever their sins. So notice, he's transferring the sins of the people over to another object. This is, I think, vicarious atonement, isn't it? That something takes our sins away, putting them on the head of the goat. And it shall be sent off to the wilderness through a designated man. Thus the goat shall carry on it all their iniquities to an inaccessible region, and the goat shall be set free in the wilderness. And Aaron shall go into the tent of meeting. And by the way, the rabbis extend this idea that the goat goes over a cliff and dies, and therefore the sins die with him. So the rabbis take the momentum of this idea, sending the goat off, and add its culmination. Verse 23, and Aaron shall go into the tent of meeting, take off the linen vestments that he put on when he entered the shrine, and leave them there. He shall bathe his body in water in the holy precincts, and put on his vestments. Then he shall come out and offer his burnt offering and the burnt offering of the people, making expiation for himself and for the people. The fat of the sin offering he shall turn into smoke on the altar. So he's first sanctifying the altar, then he's sanctifying the people, I guess. He who set a zazel goat free shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. After that he may re-enter the camp. I infer from this that somehow this act makes the agent of the goat thing impure and needs to purify himself. Maybe contact with the sin agent contaminates him. The bull of sin offering, verse 27, and the goat of sin offering, whose blood was brought in to purge the shrine, shall be taken outside the camp, and their hides, flesh, and dung shall be consumed in fire outside the camp. In other words, maybe the camp has now been purified, and so the impure things you need to dispose of outside. He who burned them shall wash his clothes and bathe his body in water. After that he may re-enter the camp. And this shall be to you a law for all time. See, now we're moving to Yom Kippur. In the 7th month, on the 10th day of the month, you shall practice self-denial. What does that mean? What does that mean, self-denial? Flagellation? Well, the rabbis take it to mean fasting. And you shall do no manner of work. Maybe that's a form of self-denial. Neither the citizen nor the alien who resides among you. So it looks like the alien is involved in this whole regimen of offering, which, if that's true, is also an interesting idea. The stranger is in some sense integrated into the community, at least for this ritual. For on this day atonement shall be made for you to cleanse you of all your sins. You shall be clean before the Lord. It shall be a Sabbath of complete rest for you. Shabbat, Shabbaton. Okay? So this is the Sabbath of Sabbaths. And you shall practice self-denial. It is a law for all time. The priest who has been anointed and ordained to serve as priest in place of his father shall make expiation. He shall put on the linen vestments, the sacral vestments, he purge the innermost shrine. He shall purge the tent of meeting and his altar. I take it this now is pointing to generations to come, something like that. And he shall make expiation for the priests and for all the people of the congregation. This shall be to you a law for all time, to make atonement for the Israelites for all their sins once a year. And Moses did as the Lord had commanded him. So let me ask you this question. Are we in trouble because we don't have an altar on which to do this? Don't we need an altar in order to be able to cleanse the community? And where would the altar be? In the temple. We don't have a temple. Don't we need the third temple? Don't we need to aspire to finding a way to get up there on the Temple Mount? It doesn't matter if Muslim shrines are there. They're only impediments. What we have to do is build the third temple. And we have to do it. Otherwise, there's no purity for the people. I mean, I suggest that this may be part of the logic of those who want to build the third temple. The means for purification are absent. And there are people over in Jerusalem who are studying the laws of sacrifice so as to be ready when the Messiah comes and gives the orders to build the third temple, from which will eventuate, probably within 15 minutes, World War III. But what about that? I mean, This shall be, think of yourself as an Orthodox Jew living in Israel or not, who reads verse 34. This shall be to you a law for all time. That's what God wants. What difference does it make that there have been 2,000 years without a temple? What difference does that make? We haven't had what we need. To make atonement for the Israelites. You want atonement? You want to return to the pure status quo ante? You want to accomplish that? No temple, no altar, no go. You're in an impure state. And the people has been in an impure state for 2,000 years. Let's take religion seriously, folks. It's not just a matter of you shall love the Lord your God with all. Yeah, I've said it. Okay, let's move on to the Micha Mocha. Is that real religion? I'm just trying to be a bit rhetorical here. This is the real thing for those for whom it is. Seward.
Well, is there a law that says that the temple has to be a Temple Mount? Originally it was Shiloh, wasn't it?
Well, there were tabernacles there, but when David wanted to build it, that was, of course, to his great credit, and Solomon finally had the chance to do it. And I think the ideology, is you're questioning the ideology, is that this is its final resting spot. By the way, there's also mythology about Jerusalem too, and in particular the Temple Mount. That is the omphalos of the world. Yeah. It's the belly button of the world. From that point, all of creation took place. So when we talk about synagogue Judaism, we're assuming what we might call the isomorphic quality of all space. That any space is the same as any other space. And therefore, a synagogue can go anywhere. Temple Judaism, there's only one place, resists the isomorphism of space and suggests that some spaces are more sacred than others. There's a hierarchy of spaces. I mean, the rabbis in the Mishnah say something about the land of Israel is the center of the world, and Jerusalem's the center of the center, and the Temple Mount is the center of the center of the center, and the place where the Ark of the Covenant lay, that's the very center of the center. So even Israel is arrayed around different qualities of space. And now, if you assume that, there's only one place. But I don't know why it has to be the Temple Mount, except for that myth. It has to be there.
But the Ark of the Covenant doesn't exist.
True. And what's the problem there? You could still build the temple. Yeah, it's a good question. What role does the Ark of the Covenant play in, let's say, the perfection of the altar as a vehicle for getting atonement? And you're raising that question. I don't know the answer to it. I guess, some people think that maybe it was buried there, and if only we were in control of the Temple Mount, we could figure that out. So, yeah. No, good question. Maida?
Why this emphasis on rebuilding the temple when they were nowhere near the space where the temple was eventually built? This was centuries before that temple was built. So why are we putting that inference here, that it has to be on the Temple Mount?
Well, I think what we're doing is, so Maida's asking, why emphasis on the temple, and particularly that spot, when here we don't have any intimation at all of that. And I think the idea is, if you follow the trajectory, the history, right? Once the temple is built, now the Temple Mount, I think, according to kind of rabbinic legend, is the place where Abraham sacrificed or tried to sacrifice Isaac. By the way, if we went back there, to 22. Verse 14 of chapter 22 of Genesis. And Abraham named that site Adonai Yireh, whence the present saying, on the mountain of the Lord there is vision. Yireh, to see. So it's the place where God sees, from which you could infer, but there's no necessity of this inference, that this is a special place. And in a way, it makes, it's a sort of a response to your point. If we already have intimations way back in Genesis of the centrality of that place, you have to assume that that's where Abraham went to sacrifice Isaac. A 3-day journey from, where was he? Bethlehem. So you could, by the way, working hard to do what I'm trying to do, to show the plausibility of response to Maida and to Stewart and to others, is the work that the rabbis did under the pressure of these concerns and questions. That's why, in a way, they had to build a case for Jerusalem. So, in a way, it's after the fact arguing. You had the temple there. Why do we have the temple there? Because it was the place it belonged. And it belonged there long before it got there. Otherwise, and in a way, this is how religions work, don't you? Jesus was killed ignominiously on a cross with criminals. Well, that's the end of the movement, isn't it? Your savior, your leader dies. That's the very definition of the end. Wait a minute now. We believe he was resurrected. That casts light back on everything that led up to that. Having assumed the climactic event, resurrection, everything makes sense now. We better put some miracles into the Gospels because they foreshadow Jesus' role. Of course I'm not saying this to diminish or to mean any of that. That's the way religions work. The Temple Mount was there, therefore it belonged there. And if it's destroyed, it's the place that... And you might say that there's something arbitrary about it, and I could agree. The question is not, is it... I'm going to try this out. The question is not only, is it true that the temple belonged there, that Jesus was resurrected? The question is also, what is the impact of that belief? Does that belief empower a people, not just the first generation of Christians, but the second, the 20th, the 200th? Therefore, in a way, Rosenzweig has the idea, Franz Rosenzweig, of the messianic theory of truth. The truth of a claim will be shown to be true by the career of that claim. And if that claim lasts and has power over time, that's a way of seeing it as true, even if we can't demonstrate in an isolated way that it's true. Something like that. So, the temple was destroyed more than 2,000 years ago. It's still part of the belief system of fervent Jews to this very day. Candy?
Well, I appreciate what you're doing with Leviticus, and I like understanding about purification and all the laws that are in here. But how do all of those purification rituals transfer to the prayerful culture that we have today?
Yeah.
And maybe I'm jumping the gun and it's another lecture next week or next year, because I know it's a big
or 20 years
question.
from now.
But it's important for me to understand how Leviticus relates to my life, other than, like, what do we do for purification besides recite Kadosh, Kadosh, Kadosh on Saturday morning?
Yeah, well, it's a big question. So Candy is asking, yeah, Leviticus seems fascinating. We're glad we're doing
Well,
it.
Reform Judaism must say something about that.
How do we do it today? Let me just quickly try to say a few things about it. So, if we put aside the blood and the animals as the vehicles for purification, and ask ourselves, is what we do in some way purifying, in some definition of purify? Well, I could certainly be psychological about it. We come in and we experience a ritual, and some of us, some of the time, to some degree or another, feel better, feel as if something important has happened to us through hearing the music, reading the prayers, and so on. So there may be a psychological kind of purification, leaving in a mood different from the mood with which we came in, and maybe even be feeling empowered by that move. I'm ready to live tomorrow in a way that I didn't live today because of the ritual, psychological. There could be social purification. We come in, we see our neighbors, Shabbat Shalom, we sit together, we feel the presence of others. We feel in this setting the power of community. And that the feeling of the power of community purifies, enables, emboldens. That's communal. How about in terms of tradition? It's not just that I gather with the people who are there with me. I'm gathering in a way in which my ancestors gathered, mutatis mutandis, the differences having been put aside. We may do it differently, but when I read, praised are you, Lord our God, and God of our ancestors, God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. Wow. I have a past, and it's an exalted past, and it's brought me to this day, and I feel nourished by it. So the purification of belonging to my generations and the future generations who are not yet, if I can do this, come and keep some of these important things going, the chances of the generations to come will do it as well. So psychological, communal, traditional, there must be other ways of doing it. The holidays do that as well. We do it through words and music and gestures, I mean, after all, Reformed Jews used to be described as people who are all mind, and they're there in body only because they can't bring their minds without their bodies. It was very cerebral religion. Because we put aside all the potential irrationalities. And now we're doing a bunch of other stuff. When I first started at the temple, our cantorial soloist sang at the congregation. She had a beautiful voice. We remember Nanette Canfield, beautiful voice. It was a pleasure to be in her presence. But nobody else sang. Now we're all singing, so we're all a part of this. So it seems to me there are analogs to it if we don't think of purification in terms of getting rid of our sins vicariously.
Yeah, I kind of like the Catholic mode of, going to confession and being done with it.
Yeah.
I mean, the other's a lot harder.
Well, look, I mean,
And and does he have holy water sprinkled on you? I mean, even if it's just a baby and then be holy, wouldn't that be wonderful?
By the way,
As easy as that?
I want to say something on behalf of St. Paul. One of the things that Paul did, the thing he did, was he moved from place to place to organize and found a community. And then what would happen is So he went to Corinth. And he left and went on to somewhere else. And he heard that the people in Corinth had misunderstood his message. And so he writes a letter to the Corinthians. He wrote 2 letters to the Corinthians. One of the misunderstandings was, you think that because Christ died for your sins, you're now without responsibility. No, that's wrong. You still have responsibility. And then we have the Gospel of Matthew, which is all about the law will always be applicable. So this business of this idea of a mechanical understanding of ritual, if you just do it, it's done, without some responsibility for living your life differently on the basis of the power of that ritual. So, yeah, I don't think any religion really worth its salt, now maybe I'm criticizing this business here, has a mechanical view, a deterministic view of ritual. I just have to go through the motions. I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, but Doris?
I want to get back to the text.
Don't you love St. Paul in here, though?
There's a parallel text to chapter 16 that is not written here, but it's elsewhere. And that's the text, not for what the priest does and has to prepare, and the people who have to iron these linens and get him all decked out. There's a text about me in the congregation. And I, then and now, on Yom Kippur, I, in the congregation, have to get ready for this. And what happens is that the rite of atonement, whether it's in a temple with an altar or not, is repeated year after year. And I have to get ready for it too. And I know that it's going to be about my sins. And I have to be ready to say, I would like that sin atoned. Because I've been thinking about it and I've been encouraged to think about it because I know the holy days are coming up. But I'm also free to say, I don't want it atoned. And I can come to that ceremony ritual here or downtown and sit in the pew or in a comfortable chair and say, this is all very nice and maybe next year I'll be ready for this, but I'm not ready now. And therefore, my sin is not atoned. It's not in the pile of sins atoned. I'm free to do that. Or I'm free to say yes. I'm a thief. I robbed people, and I want that stopped. And at that point, my sin is collected in the act of atonement. And I want to practice self-denial. I want to be purified. So I see 2 things happening here. One is that in the rite, my sin is atoned, but also that I'm responsible for an act of...
You see that in chapter 16?
I do.
Okay.
I see the need to respond to it somehow.
Yeah. Although what human beings are asked to do here is to provide the necessary conditions for the act of atonement, but not the act itself.
Exactly.
Okay. So I thought you were arguing for agency to be able to do it or not to do it. Maybe I'll do it next year.
Well, that's a choice I make at the very beginning.
It's true, but the difference is, I mean, I feel that you're overstating the role of agency as it applies to Leviticus 16. Not to us, Was your idea here that even there in 16, we have significant agency other than preparation? I mean, I can't engage in the act of atonement in 16. I'm dependent upon someone else to do it for me. Is that true?
That's true.
Yeah, right. Yeah. So, gosh. How about if I tried to read a little about Azazel? Let's see if I can do that. So here's what Robert Alter says in his translation, note on the passage, to send it off to Azazel in the wilderness. Approximate analogs to the so-called scapegoat ritual. And you can see that the word scapegoat may have its origin in the word escape goat. It's the goat that escapes from the community. Using different, approximate analogs to the so-called scapegoat ritual, using different animals appear in several different Mesopotamian texts. The origins of the practice are surely in an archaic idea that the polluting substance generated by the transgressions of the people is physically carried away by the goat. Azazel is not represented as a competing deity or demon, rivaling God, but the ritual depends upon a polarity between God/human civilization and Azazel/the remote wilderness, the realm of disorder and raw formlessness. An unapologetic reading might make out the trace of a mythological plot, even if it is no more than vestigial in this monotheistic context. That's an interesting point. A mythological, maybe multi-god story which remains even though it's been scrubbed by a monotheistic ideology. It's still there. It is as though the goat, piled with impurities, were being sent back to the primordial realm of welter and waste before the delineated world came into being. But that realm here is given an animal or demon tag. The early rabbis this is the point that I said earlier, having read it right here. The early rabbis, extending the momentum of the ritual, imagined the goat as being pushed off a high cliff. But in our text, it is merely sent out or set free in the wild wilderness that is the realm of Azazel. I got a bar mitzvah coming up, but let's see if I can. Somebody go tell the family I'll be with them at 11:30. This is in the JPS commentary, Baruch Levine. So, James Fraser devoted an entire volume of his monumental study of religion and folklore, The Golden Bough, to the subject of the scapegoat. He was able to document similar practices in diverse societies all over the world in many periods of human history. The transfer of sins or other forms of impurity to an animal or to a person or an object by means of procedures calculated to destroy it or prevent its return clearly reflects the magical objectives of demonology and exorcism. This observation raises a crucial question for our understanding of biblical religion. Is there a place for magic in a monotheistic religion that is based on the proposition that one God rules the universe by his supreme will? In other words, are not magic and monotheism, as understood in biblical theology, mutually exclusive? Some insight into this question can be gained from a more detailed differentiation of the various kinds of magic. The Torah and the rest of the Bible voice vigorous opposition to almost all forms of divination, to the use of omens and incantations, and to necromancy, this is dealing with the dead bodies, and sorcery. At the same time, there is no explicit objection to certain forms of therapeutic magic, such as might be employed in the healing process or in protecting against infection and illness. This omission allows us to propose that therapeutic magic may well have been permitted. Nevertheless, afflictions had to be treated by a proper Israelite priest and in the prescribed manner. In fact, the rites of the scapegoat have frequently been compared with those prescribed for the treatment of certain ailments and infections. Thus, an individual afflicted with the symptoms of leprosy, or skin, not really leprosy, a skin disease, was to be purified by means of a complex ritual involving two birds, one to be slaughtered and the other to be sent forth into the open sky after being dipped in blood of the first. And then let me just skip a bit and just read one final sentence, which is quite provocative. The priestly ideology was thus based on an awareness that even in a world ruled by God, evil forces were at work. Forces that had to be destroyed if God's earthly home, his sanctuary, was not to be defiled. That's kind of interesting, isn't it? I mean, we can think, some pure monotheism, Abraham found the one God and so on. But if we look more carefully, we see a much more complex understanding of this, which suggests, at least one suggestion is that monotheism is a dare because we recognize that so many other forces are at work in the world, benign and malevolent, that to say there's only one major force is really not warranted by empirical observation. And therefore, there's the struggle to a kind of as-if understanding. I know the rabbis would hate me for saying it this way. But I think that some of these notes point to the recognition in biblical literature that there are competitors to the idea of pure monotheism. So with this, I'll have to stop. We'll continue next week. Pretty soon, next week, we're going to get to Leviticus 19, the Holiness Code. Yeah, love your neighbor as yourself. Are we going to have any problem with this? Shabbat Shalom. Yeah, but who is my neighbor? Hey, Sid.
Say something to baby and then
It's different than it gets be implicit. I also brought it up. I'm so aware of how people it's like cultures where they were in Egypt. It's all about chaos. Babylon sacrifice. And I read this and it's like,
But I would not suggest of doing it.
well, you wouldn't, but,
I would not.
all the time. I don't know.
Too much fundamentalism in my house.
God cannot be conditioned. So God is always forgiven. I read that.
I want that to address, because
That's exactly, I understand what you're saying. I have, on my own,
printed paper. And he went around asking Roman Catholic and to say to the person who God has forgiven you. No, I believe God has forgiven you. Invariably, the person who's doing the confessing, I'm not sure. Yeah, at the time, I don't think God understands what I did, or God would. So he said, you know, he's getting to so how do we get ourselves to forgive ourselves? So one way is meditation, because identify a sense of vulnerability, and then I don't have control. Well, yeah, therapy is actually because it has to refer. There's a difference between sin and sin. I can tell you, I'll mention something right now. I've had a adulterous affair with the husbands of people in this room. Hard, right? And I and I wouldn't have been happy. So, I'm addicted to something. There's a difference between a sin and a sin. And that's what this is about. It's like a sin that gets addicted. But it leads to make up the difference.
Yeah.
Or denying or making. I mean, some people it's a big feeling. That's what that's the part about
Look at the fact that there was a lot of different means of basing it probably some that years ago about that
Good as it is, for one thing, that's the way it was done. Well, medicine, economic background. And that's where all of this. Can't see this.
Is that car closet empty over here?
Doing it in the temple. So what they're saying is they don't talk about all the things.
This is the reading. This is
There's this huge Torah check, so excited to do it. Well, it's in the board, 1942, Prague, they gathered all of the schools throughout Germany. Probably knowing it, that created wasn't the old story, but it's might survive. And so, the guy yesterday, they established here, check and they have sent to London, restore, repair, document it, and then we would be elected to change the things all over the world. And so tomorrow, celebrating the 6th birthday, they really decided what to do. I essentially get invited to all over the country to bring their check
people are coming from several states, but they probably would drive here. Easily. How are you? Yeah?
And they are frequently choice.
Yeah.
Oh, we don't get.
Not yet, but I will. Will I see you tomorrow? John?
No, it's not. It's a medication. You need to take it or not take it.
So this thing's going on one, I don't even know if it'll stay, but our temple has 3 that scroll.
And you have to take it for me.
But we don't, you know, we're given probably another, step.
That's how I want to.
We have one of the others. So they're gonna do something where everyone brings and read like one line of Torah. And that's what's going on. It's not a great time. You know what I actually feel really remiss, I have not been back for receptors, but not this. I don't know which of those things is. If you thought it made sense, I don't know if she's up for that. But I can't go today.
She's just,
I think I can go today. I might go today. And Ruth listens to this woman who does the whole thing in Broadway. She is
it's about like,
I went once, and she's outstanding. I know, yeah.
my mother's just, I had a say about the sale of her safety. So I said, no, and she's left about it when I'm here.
Is it sort of anti-political?
Did they tell you what kind? Yes, yes, it is.
My mother was never angry, you know, like, and then buckles. Or the-
So she had what? By herself. And then she called me from, you know, we were, we children,
There's one day, there's some other things, HER, yes, and,
Good.
you know, what
she
hers.
says she's just feeling
I have the results of those.
new ownership
Testing told me it's
Yeah, well, she asked her for some
very.
What you got time?
Is you gonna wrestle a bird?
but we say.
Lower it back up now.
You got open all the doors.
You said I got
Yeah, put some right there. Put the trash can right there. Get rid of these. Oh, you got enough to go. That's all it's counting. Stuff that's stacked in the closet.
right? Right. Good though? Everybody's good? Good.
Before it's still going through terrible too.
Take that table, push it in the back of the library.
Okay. Ooh,
This stuff for Jesus ain't got it in me.
I'm tired.
Damn.
The crazy part about it is she was trying to get to me and talk about myself. I want to see her do this shit by herself. Oh, that one ain't do that.
I'm not taking this video.
What's
Don't
on
block the door yet. Just put them over there. Don't block that door yet. We have to get the linen
Y'all
door.
block what?
The linen door. Yeah, we said it.
Bitch, you need to eat something.
I can't focus on that shit till we get this shit.
My legs hurt.
I don't know what kind of meat she had, but obviously her priority in this building. She's we on a time schedule. Your ass scrolling.
Just had the rest of my day. Okay. What we doing? You keeping this table out here? So with this coffee situation, is it possible for me to go? Because it's only like halfway. What I was gonna do was, I was gonna take the big coffee machine just in the kitchen and just like make a picture or a regular picture of these cats and pour it in there. That'll work. So now,
That's why I was telling you, so don't be pressing us about fucking, what we doing back there. Cause it really ain't shit. Sure you guys ain't finished moving these chairs.
did you tell me to wait?
I said you're gonna block that damn door.
Oh.
You should put that other table in there, you could put the 4 chairs right there.
I can close the door.
I'm gonna put this in there now.
I'm gonna grab the mic stand.
Skin his teeth. See, I could have my reader in here this fucking morning. But I'm so focused on the nighttime. Like now, Jenny said shit about Fairmont having a bar mitzvah here.
What, next weekend?
Yeah,
Yeah.
and we talked about both weekends.
So it don't like work next weekend now.
Man. Yeah, we do.
Who?
We got back-to-back bar mitzvahs. I want to say, I think, but see, this the
I
thing.
work 2 to 7 Saturday, and I work 7 to 1 Sunday. And Selena was Saturday, I know for sure, because that's Saturday the day we switched. She works 7 a.m. to 2 p.m. I work 7 p.m. I work 2 p.m. to 7 p.m. Saturday.
So ain't no bar mitzvah party. I gotta look at that schedule, because if it's a night party, she better figure it out, and I can figure it out fast. Because I'm not doing both. I refuse to. I'm not about to be working that night and get up there and everything else. Because I already told her, if I work a bar mitzvah party, I'm not coming in on Sunday morning, period. I ain't did that shit in years, and ain't about to start. And that's fucking unfair, period. Not doing it. You used to have to do that shit, I'm not about to put that on nobody.
I don't think I would wait, because, well, I'm coming in at 10. I was about to say, because I'll work tomorrow night, and I work Monday morning. That's bad. Somebody looking down the doorway like they looking for one of us. What time they come out that chapel? Because don't you need to go move them chairs and them pillows and stuff?